Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders Podcast. I'm your host, Addison Galambos. Today's guest is one that I've been really excited to have on the show for a long time because I feel like he embodies the kind of builder mindset that's central to this podcast. Bonsai isn't made in a single session. It's built, like I said, through those kind of successive iterations and that disciplined refinement. So you probably already know who I'm talking about, but I'm really excited to have Peter T on the podcast, who, if you don't know him, you might be living under a rock, but he's one of the premier bonsai professionals in the United States. So he's based out of Auburn, California, and Peter's known for a methodology in bonsai creation that leads to really long-lived designs, and his results speak for himself. His clients have consistently taken home top honors at the Pacific Bonsai Expo. So we're going to talk about, his mindset in the practice of bonsai. We're going to talk about how he structures his relationships with clients so that they and him can be successful. And then also interested in chatting with him a bit about his experience training the next generation of American professionals. So Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Addison. I really appreciate you having me. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about building bonsais. I mean, that's I definitely try to approach it that way, and I'm so happy to hear that people like you are focused on that, because I think that's something we're kind of missing right now, and so you promoting that is such a great thing. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to do it, so I don't know if I'm promoting it yet. But yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, for me, there's always been like bonsai. I have my main career that I'm working in, and then
Mhm.
bonsai is this thing that I want to hone as like it's just for me. I'm not doing it from a professional standpoint, and
Mm.
so when I look at it, like I want to be able to create a high quality product, right? And that doesn't just come about because of nothing, right? So I think
Yeah. Mm.
seeing work like yours is really inspirational, and so that's why I'm really excited to have you on the show, because I feel like it embodies that idea of this is something that's built really precisely and intentionally and only comes about after doing that for a long period of time, which to me is impressive and something I want to learn to emulate, right?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Cool. So, I think of you as a tree builder, somebody who's able to take trees in all stages and drive them towards, the very top tier of designs. So I'm curious, it sounds like from what you just said, you also relate with that kind of idea, but how would you describe your approach and kind of the standard that you're looking to drive whenever you touch a tree?
I mean, my approach, it can be somewhat straightforward. I'm heavily influenced by Japanese aesthetics, and especially being in Japan, uh, how they like to do bonsai there. Which, interestingly enough, there's a lot of misconceptions about that also, which hopefully we can talk about too. I People ask me that question, and I've thought about it often along, and I'm not quick to come up with like answers, so I think about things for a long period of time. But it's just a combination of things. I mean, part of it just being a bonsai professional and building bonsais. I mean, part of it is going to be just the responsibility of actually being productive. I mean, that's just very practical stuff. Someone brings a tree to me, or they working with me, they expect to see some kind of result, and I have to give it to them. Right. That probably bled over from when I was fixing cars for about 10 years. I used to work at a Ford dealership. That was my career before I started doing bonsai. Bonsai was my hobby when I was doing that. And one of the things I always remembered about being at the dealership is that when people had a problem, with their cars, they brought it to us. And when it came into my stall, it stopped with me, right? There's nobody else they can take it to. Like, I had to have the answers. So I kind of treat bonsai like that in a mechanical way, or at least just a responsibility on my end, that I'm the one that's supposed to be able to help people get their bonsai to another level. I mean, it's, yeah, talking about longevity and design and things like that. I mean, the design part can be simple and complex at the same time. The longevity stuff is partly, why not create a tree that you can enjoy for a very long time? The practical side of me is kind of like, well, it would be kind of crappy if I made a tree and it only looked good for like a year. If it looked good for like 5, 10, 15 years, that would be great. It also saves me a bunch of time in having to work on the tree all the time too, right? I mean, there's maintenances and things like that, but uh, I think a lot of people can relate that it's probably not that fun to have to wire a tree like all the time, every time to rebuild something, and maybe you don't even get that much progress for doing that. And you're like, is this how it really supposed to go? And it turns out, no, not really.
That makes a lot of sense. Actually, I thought your mechanic analogy was very interesting, where essentially, the buck stops with you in terms of somebody comes in and wants their car fixed. They don't care about how you describe it. Like if the check engine light comes on right after they leave, they're not going to be happy, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
So it's
so
got to
I
have
mean,
results, right?
yeah, yeah, and I'm not saying I know everything, of course. I don't know everything, but I do try to make it a point to, if something new does come up or something that I don't understand, really stepping up and trying to understand and figure these things out. Which I think that mentality has really helped me get better at bonsai. Right? It's you don't just kind of give up and say, well, it is what it is, and who knows what happened. It's really making that little extra effort to figure things out and try to be the one that knows. You know, I mean, who else is gonna know, right?
Yeah, yeah. You are. If you don't know, then we're in trouble. So I guess with the mechanic scenario, though, the car leaves the shop and the check engine light's off or it runs and the customer is happy. But in the bonsai, scenario, it isn't always instantly apparent that the tree has moved forward in a good direction, right? So how do
Yeah.
you
Hmm.
like that? Somebody comes in with, I guess the canonical example would be something like somebody comes in with a maple tree that has a really wide silhouette and is very leggy, and you chop off all the branches, and then you've restarted that tree from the interior and are going to build a better degree of ramification at the same silhouette, yada yada, right? But to somebody who maybe isn't familiar with that process, they might not understand that, oh, we've moved the tree forward in a good direction. So I'm curious, how do you bridge that gap with your friends and clients?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely, when we get into like building of trees, it's not any kind of a quick thing for sure. And yeah, sometimes when we have a deciduous tree or we have a piece of material that we have to start over, say there's some kind of structure to it or some kind of style, but say there's some core things we want to change. Let's say all the branches are too long. That's pretty core stuff there. And we find out that, okay, well, for this particular material we can cut the branches back and rebuild, right? So usually when I do that with my clients, in the beginning especially, I have to do a lot of explaining, right? I have to sit down with them, and for a long period of time, I have to keep reminding my clients that, okay, this is why we're doing this, so that they kind of understand that, well, I'm not just kind of off the cuff, just chopping a bunch of stuff off, and I'm going to leave them hanging. I always approach it as, okay, I'm doing this because I'm trying to get things to back bud, or we want the division to start here, and this is the result of that. Generally, I also give them kind of a basic time frame, right? So it's not just all shocking. I don't want to do something to the tree and then later tell them that, oh, by the way, this was a 20-year plan, right? And they're like, wait a minute. But it's just like, and it's funny. I mean, I take so much of the stuff that I do. I take from my mechanic days. Clients generally are happy if you at least are just honest with them and just keep them informed. That's really what it is. Hopefully, the information is good, and you tell them, this is what it's going to take. This is why I'm doing this, and it's digestible, right? They might not be able to take it all immediately, but they think about it, and generally, everybody kind of comes around, and it's something they can process. It just might take a little bit of time. Some people faster than others, but I find that helps a lot. I mean, communication is key. I've heard so many horror stories with old professionals, new professionals, where yeah, they came and chopped off all my stuff and then they just walked away. And you're like, well, okay, well, that's not good. Right? That could be a little discouraging. So communication is key in just getting people prepared for what this building of bonsai.
Makes sense. Do you have challenges with, or do you ever worry about, once somebody steps on this path to build a tree, you have to continue on that path to get to the
Mm.
vision, right, that you've seen. So I'm curious, like, do you run into issues where someone doesn't see you frequently enough, or they make the wrong decisions after you've restarted things and then they have to restart again? Does that lead to any
Yeah.
frustrations, or do you have that as a challenge, or how do you overcome that, in that build process?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, a part of developing trees is definitely the follow through, right? Making sure we work on it the correct time, correct technique, and when is that time? So usually when I work with clients, I tell them a lot of this up front. I give them a baseline of, okay, well, for this particular material, how often should the tree be worked on? Now they don't have necessarily have to work with me, but at least I give them the info that says, okay, well, I would say in May, let's say we work on something today. In May, it's good to do this and this. And then in July, it'd be good to do this and this. If it's appropriate, the tree's healthy and growing, because yeah, if we skip some of these things, sometimes no matter how good the initial work was, it could be lost because there was no follow through. So sometimes it can be frustrating working with people that say they just missed that opportunity. I didn't get a chance to see them again. Sometimes I tell people and then they just don't do it, right? That happens. People forget, people have lives. I think an important part is, yeah, not just the communication side, but even like today, that's why I tend to hone my kind of client list to people at least who are willing to connect and kind of stay on this schedule to keep the tree developing, as opposed to like if somebody emailed me or called me and said, hey Peter, I want you to work on this tree, and and I don't know when we're going to work on again, right? It's a kind of a one-off thing. Yeah, I decided a long time ago that that was nothing against them or anything, but that's not the clients I'm looking for, right? Because without that follow through, things don't really kind of continue. You might be able to make the tree look kind of nice, but it's very short lived, and after a while you kind of can't help but feel like, well, why am I doing this, right? There's not a lot of satisfaction in that, because you know what's going to happen. The tree's just going to fall apart, and then that's not fun. So I've been focusing on working with clients who definitely want to take trees to the next level. Hopefully, ideally, they can kind of keep up with the ideal work schedule. And I know that costs money. People who work with me, it could be a financial issue. So people say who don't have the finances to kind of work with a professional, I do try to at least give them the concepts of, okay, with at least within this year, these are things you should try to do. Maybe it's not with me, but keep studying, see what other people are saying. Just try to at least find time to do these key things. And that usually does kind of keep people going. And and there is success in that too.
That makes a lot of sense. I don't think I've heard other professionals kind of put that to words before, but intuitively, it makes sense that because this build process happens over a lot of long period of time and it's like a skilled process, you have to know what you're doing. Like you as the professional can impart some of that, but especially for newer folks on their journey, like they will need more touch points with you, right? To in order to make sure that they're adhering and learning that process, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that begs the question of, I'm sure your time is very limited, right? And so there's only a certain number of clients that you can work with, or not, let's say optimally a client would have 3 touch points with you a year or something like that to drive a set of trees forward. That's just a random number, but
Yeah.
you know, you're only going to have so many days in a year, right? And so you can only
Yeah.
have so many clients that are on that kind of train. Is that a
Yeah.
challenge that you think you run into? Like you just don't have enough time to drive that many trees to refinement, or how does that work?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I first came back from Japan, I did kind of what most people would expect, say, a professional would do, which is, okay, they're gonna host a bunch of workshops, work with different people, work with some people privately, kind of a whole mixed bag, maybe do some demos, stuff like that. And that's exactly what I did. And it's great and all. I mean, I have a real good time working with all those people. But yeah, after a while, you start finding the people who are really interested in getting trees better or more focused on that, or at least more in line with what I'm trying to do in bonsai. They kind of start to show themselves, and yeah, just trying to make that adjustment. Yeah, I can't help everybody because, like you said, you're just limited in time. So I've often thought about, and I work with less and less people each year, it seems, because I don't do a lot of workshops anymore, and most of my clients are private clients that just need a lot of my time to manage, say, their collection. Yeah, that's a tough thing, right? I know other professionals, they'll do things like they've created, apps, or they do videos and things like that, so people can at least refer to those videos. So there's some support there. I think for me, just thinking about, yeah, how do I help as many people as possible? That was kind of the core why I started taking an apprentice, actually, because we definitely have a shortage of instructors, even just in California, and everybody in the country generally says, it's happening in California. There's a lot of trees there, there's professionals there, and all that stuff. And we're here in California, we're kind of like, well, there's not that many still. We got a lot of people here, and it's tough because people contact me and say I can't work with them, and there's not a lot of names I can just throw back at them and say they're taking clients or they're just down the street kind of thing. All the professionals seem to be busy. So yeah, that kind of led me to thinking, well, maybe the best way to do it is try to have some apprentices, get more professionals out there, or at least encourage people who really want to become professionals to say do an apprenticeship, go to Japan, do an apprenticeship there, and come back and to help kind of feed this hunger that we have here, just in California for good bonsai instruction. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't really have a good answer for that. It's tricky. I feel bad about that. I wish I can do more and work with more people, but I haven't quite figured what's the best way to do it. So this kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, yeah. No, I didn't mean it to make you feel bad or anything. I was just
No, no,
kind
no.
of like teasing out the scenario of like
Yeah.
it takes time and you have to have interactions between the professional and the client to drive
Mhm.
these trees to this highest level, right? And
Yeah.
so that like there is a limitation to that in terms of how many people can work per professional, right? So I guess a little bit of a tangential question. Has your has your relationship with clients and the type of services that you provide, has that changed at all with the Pacific Bonsai Expo becoming such a like important and prevalent event in the region? Have you noticed any like shifts in like your conversations you have with clients or their willingness to do the type of like long-term work that you
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I mean, the great thing about the expo is that now we have an event that's really trying to highlight high quality bonsai. A lot of people want to be a part of that, and there are requirements to get into the expo. So I mean, it's a driving force to get people thinking about, okay, well, Peter, what do I need to do to kind of get my tree ready so that it can be accepted, or even say win a prize, right? What are some of the things that they need to do? So absolutely, it's motivated almost all of my clients to do what it takes to participate in that and show well, not necessarily to even just win a prize or anything, but just to get it in the show and have the tree be the best that it could be. More people are getting more into displays and talking about that. I do often these days now when my clients buy trees, either from me or from other people, they do tend to ask the question, do you think this can get into the expo now, right? Raw material or not, or more developed? That's always a key question. And I do have to be honest with them. And I tell them, yeah, and sometimes, it might say not be I might not be able to sell something because of that, but it is what it is. So I think overall that's a good thing too, because it does force us to have material that is, say, ideal for the show, or material that is at a level that can get into that show.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, overall
Yeah.
it's positive, I think.
Yeah, that's definitely shaped my, that's now a bar for my collection. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
could this get into the expo? Should I potentially, do I bring it into my collection or not, especially with limited space? But I think it drives, like you said, now people growing and collecting this material have a bar to look at so they can, because it's all going to relate to money essentially, right? Like a tree that meets that bar will be able to command a higher price, right, than one that can't to
Mm.
some extent. And so, that drives that incentive gets driven down through the kind of pipeline of trees being built, right? Hopefully.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it definitely, yeah, it's definitely going to affect the cost of the tree. Yeah.
Do you ever make decisions on clients to take on based on their, do they have trees that are expo worthy versus not, or are they on a track to get to the expo? I know clients ask you about that, but I'm curious, like if that ever factors into your decision making for
Yeah,
taking on
a
clients.
little bit. I mean, one of the things I've used about the for the expo is, people always talk about they want to develop a collection that's high level, right? Or a nice collection. or a collection that they can be proud of. And so, like you're saying, with the expo, I kind of treat that like, okay, well, if you want a high collection, if you just use the expo as a bar and what you decide to have in your collection, you're gonna have a very nice collection. So people who are when I decide, okay, if somebody new is I mean, I'm pretty welcoming to all new clients, right? But I am realistic about it these days about the match between me and the clients, right? Because if it's not a good match, nobody's really happy, right? They might not get what they want. I'm not getting what I want, and so it's kind of a mutual thing. These days, I do try to find clients or have clients that are more focused on having higher quality trees or having, say, the expo as a bar. I would never turn new people away, but if I get a sense that they're just kind of having, I don't want to say like just having fun, right? Because it should be fun. But if they're not as serious about it or trying to really create something that's, truly beautiful, it's not even that I don't want to work with them. It just comes down to we just might not be compatible, right? I'm not the professional for you, kind of thing. Because it sounds like they're looking for something different than what I'm looking for. So I don't really look at it as a, well, some of these clients are not up to my level or anything like that. It's just more about compatibility. What is it that they really want, and am I the right person to help them with that? Because there are things that I'm looking to do also, and I feel
100%.
that's important. So we're all happy.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's a very good kind of attitude to have about it. Uh, One thing that I kind of want to tease out of that is what is it that you're looking for, right? Like what kind of tree work or client interactions or end goals are you looking like are fun for you, right? That keep
Mhm.
you doing bonsai, and like what's the type of work that, you would do without being paid, I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
definitely want to be paid for it, but I just mean like,
yeah,
what's the most
yeah.
fun for you?
I mean, seeing trees progress is always great. I mean, people often ask, Peter, what's your favorite tree? And that's not an easy question for me to answer. And it turns out that my answer to that really is I love working on nice trees, right? It's either it's a refined tree and it's beautiful and I'm adding to it, or it's a great piece of raw material that we're building and the tree is getting better and better. So those are the things that really get me excited when I work with clients is their willingness to say find high quality material. I try to educate them on that and say, okay, these are some key points I tend to look for. That's what you should look for, and these are the reasons. And if they follow through with that and they try to find the best material that they can, and they're really focused on doing what needs to be done to get the tree better, not taking shortcuts and things like that. That's really what excites me, and that very much would be the stuff that I would do for free, right? Because it's great. I mean, if you're creating something that's potentially going to be really beautiful, or it's beautiful, and you're adding to it, that's wonderful. If it's kind of like, oh, why am I doing this, right? It's some weird thing or something. Maybe not so excited.
Yeah. Well, that also begs the question of, can you describe a little bit of like what is a high quality tree to you?
Yeah, I mean, my general philosophy about bonsai is kind of my basic fundamental things I tend to look for are, whatever aspect of the tree, right? Starting from the ground up. So at the base, all the way to the exterior, the canopy is. I just like having trees that show a lot of age. Whatever part of the tree or whatever is specific to that tree that shows kind of this great age, this age that is beyond, our lifetime kind of thing, age that is maybe even beyond what we would think the tree would live. And so those fundamental things in the tree are kind of key, and that's always kind of in the background when I look at trees. If we see a trunk and say it's a juniper, for example, does the trunk show a lot of age? Is there a lot of character associated with that age? It doesn't necessarily have to have a bunch of movement or anything like that, but there's something, at least to me, very intriguing about things that show this age, this longevity that is very fascinating. It's kind of like looking up to your elders in a way. They've experienced a lot, and you're kind of like there's a story here. There's so much this tree can tell me, right? And so when I see things like that, or if I'm part of building that, that's what really excites me, and I tend to focus on that. So I do spend a lot of time identifying, okay, what is that, right, on every tree that I work on, and are we showing that? Are we showing the best parts of that, or we end up hiding it, or not showing it, or not building it? That tends to kind of weaken what I consider the ideal kind of feel of the tree.
Yeah, I think this question of age is an interesting one. Working with Sam and Ryan, I think in Ryan's approach, there's this concept of like age, like there's eras of a tree, right? Like it can be in its adolescent phase when it looks like X, and then it can be in its really ancient phase when it looks like Y, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's a little bit different than what you're describing, right? When you talk about age, can you tease that out a little bit and kind of
Yeah,
explain
yeah.
like when you mean age, like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, when I break it down, so I'm looking for like really old age. There's a couple of ways of looking at it. One is just the physical age of the tree. The tree is actually 100 years old, or it's a couple hundred years old, as we see, or even longer, as we see with some of the junipers that are being collected. So there's things like that, and recognizing what does that mean. Why is a juniper that is 10 years old look a certain way, and when it's 1,000 years old, what are the differences? So we want to hone in on that, and we want to make sure, okay, are we seeing that? And it's not just simplistic ways of looking at it as in, oh, well, this trunk is old. I mean, we're really talking about the details, right? How old is that dead wood? How much older does that lifeline look because of just the way it's formed or the roundness of it? And it's not just the trunk itself. It goes from the base of the trunk all the way out to the branches. And as you get to the younger portions, like the foliage part, okay, well, that's going to be the youngest, right? The tree grows foliage every year. But leading up to that, it's showing just all the nuances of physical age, right? So that's one part of it. Is it actually just old, right? Other things are things that we create, right? This the kind of the fun, manipulation side is, can we add details to the tree that makes it look older? Okay, we decide to cut the branches a certain way, or we route the branches a certain way, or we wire the branches. So, a very basic thing is like, okay, here's a pine, and we decide to bend the branch down, right? It makes the branch look older just by doing that. If it has physical age and it has like thick bark on it, that's even better, right? So now you've compounded the two things. And then when you get all into like the overall aesthetics, I also tend to focus on the age of the tree as bonsai. Like, how old is this bonsai itself? How long has it been a bonsai? And that does look different too, because that and then a third point of the ages bonsai is heavily focused in Japan, for example. They appreciate not just that the tree is old or the work is good and all that stuff. They also appreciate that this tree has been a bonsai for a very long time, and it does have a difference in how it looks from a newly developed tree. And there's value to that. So and that's why when you get into when I'm looking at some trees and I'm looking at the trunk, I'm looking at the branches, and we're thinking about techniques and ideal techniques and structure, there gets to a point where, yeah, we can focus on all the technique and all the age related to that, structures we're building. But at the end, there is a difference to, man, that tree has just been that way for a very long time. How many hands have been on that? The tree's just been kind of going along this whole time for 80 years, 100 years. So there's a maturity and there's a difference when you look at a tree that's, wow, this tree was collected 30 years ago and someone's been building it the entire time. Or in Japan, you get trees that are collected 100 years ago, and the structure has this 100-year-old feel as bonsai, versus a tree that was collected 5 years ago, and we grew some branches real quick, wired them up, and it's supposed to be something. Yeah, I mean, structurally or stylistically, when we look in the outside, it might look pretty, but it's going to be missing kind of that age as bonsai that's so key, and we don't tend to talk about it a lot. So those are kind of like at least the three key kind of old age feel that I'm looking for: the actual age, the the age that we can actually add to the tree by manipulation, And then just, how old has it been? How old has it been a bonsai? How long has it been a bonsai? I mean, that's very important, I believe.
Yeah, I think that third one is undeniable, right? The
Mhm.
cultivated age of the tree. I went to a kind of local club member's house the other day and was, helping him out with his collection and looking at some stuff, and you know, some of the trees weren't the best tree, but they'd been a bonsai for 60 years. And there's just a
Yeah,
quality that comes from that, or like a feeling. I liked how you described it as like the
yeah,
feeling of age, you know?
yeah,
There's
yeah,
a gravitas that you just accrue
yeah.
over that time period, right?
And it's so interesting because I got a hint of this in Japan, or at least I was heavily influenced in Japan with that. Is that, yeah, we can talk about techniques and styles and really just making the tree look great. But then you run into the trees that are so old as what they are. And you start finding out that whatever maybe bad structure, or we would consider bad structure, or maybe not ideal technique that was applied to the tree, that age really forgives a lot of that. And so when you see so many of these older bonsais in Japan, you start figuring out, okay, yeah, I mean, we can get technical and all that stuff, but is that really the point in the long run? It's interesting because I teach a lot of the technical stuff, and then just to find out right at the end that, it's not as important as we thought, right? Or it's not as important as we've been telling everybody. It's like that age really does forgive, right? You get a black pine that has 100-year-old bark. Nobody cares that the main branch is a little leggy at that point, right? That's part of the character of the tree now, and it's actually a positive. Now, the funny thing is that if the branch was only like 10 years old, we'd be like, yeah, it's leggy. Let's do something about it. Let's graft it, right? But when the tree is 100 years old, or the branches, or just the branch itself is 100 years old, and it has the bark of a 100-year-old tree, you're just like, I think it's okay. We're just fine. And for those of us that have gone to Kokufu, for example, and you see some trees that win the Kokufu prize, and it might not be technically ideal, but what is it about it that a bunch of judges saw and said, "This is a great tree," right? So, and that's something to really study, and I still study that to this day, right? So I don't have the answers to that, but yeah, that just opens up a whole new kind of can of worms in just looking at trees, because now it changes how we've been looking at trees and how we're, say, judging trees. And is there this kind of even more enlightened level of trying to understand what we're seeing?
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, did you start getting that appreciation for those three different types of age before you went to Japan, or was it something you developed and learned about when you were in Japan in your apprenticeship? When would you say you kind of started that relationship with enjoying that?
Yeah, I definitely learned that when I was in Japan. Just because their time frame in bonsai is just so much longer than what we have here. So let's say I studied bonsai in the US, right, for a number of years before I went to Japan. So I'm learning things, and in my limited time frame in bonsai, you think about, oh yeah, I've worked on this tree for 5 years. And for most new people, that's like, well, that's a long time, right? Because maybe you've only been in bonsai for 6 years, right? For example, it seems like a long time. I go to Japan and I'm looking at some of these more refined trees, and my teacher is telling me that, yeah, his grandfather started it. And that's what it looks like today. And this took 80 years, for example. They're like, that 5 years is like nothing now, right? And it changes your perception of what bonsai is, because it's beyond just one person now. It's a multi-generational thing. And the tree does show it, right? If you look hard enough, you do start to notice that. And that's why part of, getting into like apprenticeship stuff, that's why I still feel an apprenticeship in Japan is ideal, mainly because you're just exposed to so much more of that. Whereas in the US here, I mean, there's been people who've been doing bonsai for a long time. I mean, I have a couple of Japanese maples, for example, that was created in California that's looking nice now. And it's about 50 years ago or so that they started. So, we're gonna get some of that at some point, right? But we're still a little early, and there's not a lot of examples of that here in the US. But in Japan, I mean, it's everywhere. So it just changed it. So there, for sure, it changed how I kind of perceive what this thing that I'm doing really is. And then it kind of got me thinking, it's not really me even making a tree anymore at that point. It's just really me adding to it. I'm working on it in my limited lifespan so that the next person can then continue and continue. I've become part of the tree, right? It's not just me, I made this, you enjoy it, right? It's beyond that, which is kind of nice, right? Kind of makes you feel like you're immortal in a way, right? A little piece of you is in that tree.
Well, I'd say for me as like a newer bonsai practitioner, it's really cool to hear about that mindset and think about how to grow into that, right? Because it clearly makes really amazing plants. But, being new, it's like, oh, I want my trees to be, you know, I can focus on technique and learn
Hmm.
techniques and apply
Hmm.
them, but I can't
Yeah.
make the tree become 50 years old faster than 50 years. So it's
Yeah.
like you just got
Yeah.
to wait. You got to have patience for that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, I totally understand that. I mean, I was new at one point too, and I went through a lot of all that, and uh, I think the key thing is really just, it's not that I don't want people excited and do things with their trees, but definitely just have everybody know that, there is a part of bonsai that is this real long kind of, it just keeps growing with you, right? And you're learning these new kind of levels as you keep going. I mean, sometimes I look back to the days when I first started bonsai and how excited I was to work on trees, and I'd stay up really late and work on them. And I mean, that was super fun. I mean, I thought it was great. And I think we all go through that. And then, yeah, as we get a little older, as the trees progress, we start looking at, okay, well, yeah, it's exciting to work on trees, and then you start asking these questions. Okay, is there more to this than that? And there is, which is a good thing because I think it helps keep us interesting, right? Keep us interested. To
Yeah,
say,
and it improves our longevity in the hobby. I mean, or
mm,
well, not only a hobby, profession as well. But I'm just saying, for that's something I really wanted to kind of explore with this podcast. So I really appreciate you sharing that aspect of
okay,
your journey that I think a lot of people will probably relate to, because my thought process has always been, this is something I want to do for the rest of my life, right? And so I
mhm,
want to set myself up that I can make the best trees as possible over that, however long I have.
mhm,
So, and I guess into the next generations, set the next generation up with these trees that'll keep developing after me. And so hearing about like those phases, how those phases went for you is really interesting and kind of think relevant. So I appreciate you sharing that.
great,
I think you do need to like be successful at bonsai. I think you do need to start, even if it's just gradually, like growing that appreciation for the process and not just the end result, because
yeah,
otherwise bonsai can be pretty frustrating for you, right? If you
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Very cool.
and it's very funny when people would talk about the enjoying the process. I didn't get that at first, and I do wonder because some people that say it, they may not understand it too. Because I mean, that process is long. Again, not to discourage people, but I mean, it is a long process, right? I mean, looking back, I mean, it takes a bit of time. But having said that, that's probably why at least why I'm still doing it, right? It's a long process. It's been keeping me interested, and I don't tend to stay very interested in things for a very long time, right? I mean, bonsai is very difficult, and there's all these nuances to it, and it just keeps me going, and I still love doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that's interesting is, a bonsai tree doesn't necessarily go bad, like you by it's something that it's kind of like a K or a, compound interest, where these things that you do year over year keep successively adding value to the tree. I mean, not even just like from monetary perspective, but just
Mm,
from a like, you accumulate this stuff over time that adds to the gravitas or the patina or the
yeah.
age of the tree,
Mhm.
also is visible in the tree and thus like adds value. And again, not like aesthetic or like personal value to the tree, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
interesting. So
Mhm.
it's like you do this thing and you do it for a long time, but it always keeps growing. It's not
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not static at any point, which is cool to me at least. Or like I get enjoyment out of that aspect.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one example that I got from that, and again, something I learned in Japan, is that often when I was new, for example, and often when I talk to newer people, they can't help it, and I understand, but you know somebody in a club or in a show or whatever the situation is, they bring in a tree, and sometimes the younger people will, or the people who have been doing bonsai for not very long, they'll look at the tree and it's like, man, if we just did some of this work, it would be so much better, and blah blah blah, all that stuff. And it could be very much true, of course, right? If you worked on it, it could be better. But one thing I appreciated, and I saw this in Japan, is the people who have bonsai, or a lot of bonsai, that have just kept it going. They may not have put in all the ideal steps in developing it, but they did keep it alive and they kept it going. And they a lot of times they were growing these trees at a very slow rate. And there's a huge value in that, right? Because you start getting trees that are not, say, very big. The trunk's only a couple of inches wide, but the tree's 80 years old now because someone decided to just keep it just growing steady for 50 years or 30 years or 10 years, whatever the number is. And when that tree then moves on to somebody else, now they're working with an older piece of material that isn't, say, a tree trunk in the ground. You figure if you got a pine that's a couple inches wide and it's 80 years old, if you had planted that in the ground 80 years ago, it's a full size tree, right? That's not something you just get to be small. So it was really eye opener for me because I was one of those young people that I was talking to my teacher, and I was like, if they just did something, would it be so much better? And Mr. Tanaka had to correct me and he said, no, what they're doing has a lot of value because they're
Mm.
just keeping the tree growing so that when you get the tree, you have an old tree to work with now. So I never look at it. So that, I mean, that changed how I looked at that whole situation.
So it's almost like there's not a like if you're growing a tree slowly, there's almost not a bad way to grow it. Is that essentially what
Yeah,
you're saying?
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, in a way, because yeah, there might be stuff that you would have done different and whatnot, but they've now established an older piece of material for you to work on. It's not something that you have to grow from a cutting or something.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of value in that.
It sounds like an excuse to hoard.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Never get rid of a tree. Well,
Yeah,
if I just let it get another extra
yeah.
year, then Peter
Yeah.
will Peter will enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm
Thank you
just
to all the
teasing.
hoarders out there.
Yeah, but I mean, you do see that a lot in bonsai, right? I think there's
Yeah.
there's some truth to that. But
Uh,
so, do you think? I mean, that almost makes me sad to be doing bonsai in the U.S. though. Are we handicapped in that we don't have these generations of trees to work on, or like, are we missing out on an aspect of bonsai because we don't have that ecosystem?
Yeah, yeah. I think we are. I mean, and it's not doesn't mean it's just all bad, right, for us. It's just that we just haven't been doing bonsai long enough. That's all it is, right? Again, that's just a time thing. The people in Japan did bonsai longer than we did. Now we're coming to a time where people have done bonsai and we're moving on from one generation to the next. So we're starting to see material like that, just like it happened in Japan, because it was new there at one point too, and there was people growing stuff. They didn't have old stuff to pull from, but they built a community and kind of this structure to create all of that. And we're at a different stage, or part of the stage in kind of moving towards that direction. Will it happen in the future? I have no doubt it will happen for us. The key is just recognizing it and saying, we got to just continue what we're doing and just try to keep adding to it and building this community, and it won't be so much of a handicap, right? And again, it's not a handicap in the sense that it's a bad way. It's not like we messed up, right? It's just we started later, that's
We're,
all.
yeah, we're just at a
Yeah,
different
yeah,
phase of the journey.
yeah, exactly.
That's cool to think of though, that like maybe you can measure the health of a bonsai community by the average age of the trees, for example, right? Or like
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
that could be a metric that you could look at to see like
Mm,
what is the health of bonsai. And I mean, obviously that's not something you can really, there's not some tracker out there with every
yeah,
age of
yeah.
tree, but from an omniscient point of view, like maybe like hopefully in our lifetime, the average age of trees will increase in the US, and that will kind of show that there's a healthier bonsai scene than now, right? So that's an interesting
Yeah,
thought to think of. I'd never really thought of it
yeah.
in that way before.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of material where we can at least say, so I just picked up this tree, so and so had it for 20 years, right? We're starting to see a lot more of that. And then it's going to be a whole nother level when then the next person says, so and so had this for 20, 30 years, and they got it from so and so, and they had it for 20, 30 years. Once we see that kind of, maybe that next step where we'll be kind of there in that kind of older feeling bonsai,
Yeah.
or at least just
My
having material that's older. Yeah.
yeah, my first teacher, when I first started in bonsai out here in California, Jerry Carpenter,
Oh
he
yeah.
gift gifted me last. He's a great guy. He gifted
Yeah.
me last year a tree from his collection that was grown from seed from Japan 64 years ago or 63 years
Nice.
ago. So, it's
That's
such a
cool.
it's cool to be just like you said, like in that chain, right, of like longevity of bonsai. And
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
so one thing that came up for me when you were talking about the long, how long the process is, does that realization, like, how do you keep the urgency to do the right action at the right time? I'm thinking one side effect of that could be this is a really long process. So you lose sight of like how important the individual actions are on that
Mhm.
journey, or like any one action is less important. And I'm curious, like, your mindset on that. Like, is that the case? And then you just make sure you do the right things enough and it gets good? Or are you really, really focused on every single time you touch the tree? I'm curious, like, how you think of that kind of dichotomy.
Yeah, yeah. As I started realizing how long it takes to create, really say high quality bonsai, and the time that it takes for that, it changed how I looked at the tree. Depending on whatever I ended up doing. Right, could just be repotting, developing better roots, or initial cuts on the tree. Is that and I've told a number of my clients and people who are studying bonsai this, is that when going back to talking about appreciating or appreciating the process, right? So when I say I'm working on a trident maple and say I'm growing a main branch out and it's sticking up like 6 feet in the air, right? I mean, most people will look at that and be like, well, that's kind of weird. Why is it sticking out so far? Most people expect some kind of shape and whatnot. And what has really helped me is just understand is looking at that and knowing that that's a step that I'm taking to a goal, right? Of the tree being beautiful. And so I started looking at those branches, whatever it is. It could be a branch that's growing long. It could be that the tree is very tiny because I'm starting the division really early. Any number of those steps, I started looking at them as beautiful as what they are at that stage. It's just like, I guess, anybody that's a builder of anything, right? We can look at, I use this house building analogy a lot. Is that, say you're a framer, you build the frame in the house. Most people are going to look at it and be like, yeah, that's not that great looking, whatever, right? I'm looking for the finished house. That's what usually people are expecting. "Oh, here's a finished house. It's great, beautiful." But as a framer, for example, you can be a good framer, you can be a bad framer. And when you're a framer and you're doing those steps, or if you know what it takes to be good at that, you appreciate it for what it is. It's not this finished house because it's not a finished house, right? It's just the framing. But you put that up and okay, this is the foundation for what it's going to be. And this is beautiful as is right now.
Interesting.
So that's
So,
really, yeah, kind of helped me
okay. So
in
the
not
mindset
jumping
shift,
ahead.
so the mindset shift is, hey, I'm adding these grafts to this root grafts to this trident maple, and I've done these root grafts excellently. Like the tree doesn't look like $1 million yet because it's still in the initial phases coming out of the ground or whatever.
Yes.
But you you're like, wow, I've really done this phase of the building process really well. Like this is a well built frame. This is a well built, root
Yeah.
graft
Yeah.
scenario. Interesting. That makes a
Yeah,
lot of
and
sense.
and the tree is just going to be so awesome when it is done,
Yeah.
because these steps are just done well, right? Or
Mm,
hopefully done well. And so that keeps me excited, and it does help me because I totally understand, trying to get to the finish line as fast as possible. I mean, it's not like I try to sit there and waste time, for sure. I just try to create the best possible tree the most efficiently, right? Don't waste too much time, but don't shortcut it, because then it costs you in the final result.
that makes sense. Yeah, don't limit your final result, but you're not lollygagging either. You're doing the
Yeah,
right steps
yeah,
at the right time, and you're growing the tree
yeah.
fast and healthy, or however it's supposed to be grown.
Yeah,
Makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
So now when I visit, say, people that I work with, or I visit people who I don't work with, and I see their tree and I see a runner that's sticking out, I know exactly what they're doing. And I'm like, that is beautiful to me because you are taking those steps and you're building something great in the future, right? You're doing it. You're not wrapped around, I got to get this tree looking good right now, which requires you to cut those branches, and then your branches are all skinny. And how does that look old, right? When your branches are skinny, and it's just like, okay, what's the meaning? What are you really doing, right? What's the real meaning of all of this? But you see that big branch waving in the air, 6 feet, 7 feet long. You're really making something now. So it's just great to see.
Yeah. That kind of brings up for me the uh, at least for me, whenever I started out in bonsai and to this day, like the to bonsai and the building process isn't super intuitive to me, at least. Like if you gave me a tree, I wouldn't necessarily like a trident maple. I wouldn't necessarily like do all the steps that make a trident maple that looks like yours, right? Just naturally. So how do you recommend folks learn the building process? Like what's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
what's the best way to do that?
I mean, learning the building process is, I mean, I tell people that, I it's so important to understand how the material you're working with grows, right? So say you have an idea of what you want, and and that's a big question also. How do you even know what you want, right? Okay, so we're looking at books and we're seeing some bones and we're like, wow, that's really cool. I want that, right? I'd love to be able to create that. So, spending time studying, high quality bonsai, or at least what is considered high quality bonsai, or even whatever bonsai shape that you like, that you it doesn't even have to be something I like. It could be a different style. That's fine. Really studying that, saying, okay, what is it about? What are the characteristics that it has? Then understanding, okay, well, how does this tree grow, or how do trees generally grow? Right? It's going to be kind of a big picture stuff. Trees generally grow bigger, they grow up, they want to grow on top, right? That's kind of some key basic things. And so this is where the technical stuff comes into play. Okay, I want to make this, but I'm working with a piece of material that's not stagnant, right? It's always growing, and it doesn't just sit there and wait for you. So the challenges on the technical side is just really understanding the nuances of how does this tree grow, and what happens if I do this, and what's the response over time, and does that keep doing the same thing if I keep doing the same thing? Sometimes it changes, right? You can defoliate the tree and the leaves grow back until the tree has so many branches that you defoliate one time and it doesn't grow back. They're like, okay, well, something happened, right? What am I missing? So, really understanding how the tree grows, and then figuring out, okay, what's a technique, or the timing with the technique, to get the tree to kind of grow in the direction that I'm trying to get it to grow, and hopefully it's in a manner that the tree is able to grow, and that's one of the really cool things about working on bonsai, is that it's just not all on you, right? It's not about you. The tree plays a huge role in it, right? The tree is only going to grow a certain way. There's nothing that we do that changes the DNA of a tree or how it grows. We're just really redirecting how it grows. And so now we have to play this game. We have to strategize. I'm getting a better understanding of how this tree grows, even the little things, not just general things, but all these little nuanced things. And how can I work with that to get the tree to grow in a state that I want it to grow? Right? So you're always back and forth with the tree, working with it, seeing how it responds, maybe pushing the limits of the tree a little bit, finding those limits, right? And the things don't work out sometimes. So all these things to say, get to the final design that the tree can live that way and survive, because it's not, it's that's why we don't style trees that look like, say, upside down triangles, right? A lot of times, because they don't live that, they can't survive that way, right? And there's a reason why a lot of them are triangular in shape or round. It's because they need the sunlight, right? There's nothing we can do about that. So, some key things, yeah, really understanding what is it that you want, understanding how does the tree grow, How does it respond to certain techniques that people talk about? And working with the tree to kind of get the segments, or the little pieces to build this final tree. And it's this messy process of things growing out, doesn't look good. I always tell my clients, or a lot of my people in workshops, that you know when you're building a tree, it's not supposed to look good all the time in the traditional sense of some kind of shape, because it's not finished. It's not supposed to look good. I mean, back to that house analogy, right? It just needs to be good for what you're trying to do right now. So I think that's kind of the key thing, is really just understanding what is it that you want, and how does the tree grow, and how can you work with that? And are you able to make these adjustments, environmental, technical adjustments, whatever the case is, to get the tree to really move in the direction that you want.
That makes sense. I think your point about like the tree not looking doesn't have to look good all the time is an interesting one, especially coming from some of the kind of learnings and classes I've taken within the Mirai ecosystem, where there is this big focus on making sure that at each stage of the design, like you're maximizing the aesthetic value of the tree. And yeah, I guess I don't really know. I'm not like actually trying to say anything either way on
Mhm.
this, but I'm just curious about that because like, there is joy in putting like doing the best work that you can at each time that you touch the tree. And I'm not saying
Yeah.
you're not doing that. I'm just saying I wonder if there's a balance between those two things of like doing the best
Yeah.
action for the tree, but also
Hmm.
being happy with like the aesthetics of the tree. Some things I don't
Yeah.
think you can
Yeah.
get away from. Like if you're adding a 6 foot long sacrifice branch, it's not really going to look that good right now, but it
Mhm.
also does lead to a different end product. So you need to
Yeah.
take that, right?
Yeah.
But it's
That's a
just a kind of a
very
different outlook or
Yeah, yeah. And like kind of how what you're saying is, I'll say this, and this is not to counter anybody or argue with anybody. This is just how I feel about it, right? Is that I find that, one of the biggest issues that people have in bonsai, or, as they try to get better at bonsai, I have found that the biggest handicap for them is that they try to make the tree look good all the time,
mm,
right? Because it causes them to create shortcuts, because it's counter to any kind of structural development. Now, having said that, there are some trees that you can do that with. And in the sense of, say, like in Japan, for example, because there's a client, there's a professional client kind of relationship too, is that let's say we're working on a juniper. There are a lot of times, one route is you can go straight A to B. We do everything we need to do at the right time to get the tree to be this great tree at the end, right? We don't care what it looks like in between. That's going to be the fastest, right? But your client has to understand that. The second way they would do it is that they will actually make the tree kind of look good as they're getting to the end point, but it takes a little bit longer because I'm not trying to make this sound bad, but you're kind of wasting a little bit of time and development, so that your customers are at least a little bit happy that, oh wow, this tree's kind of cool looking.
yeah,
You
they can
know,
see the vision. They don't
they
have the
can kind
same
of see the
vision as you
vision.
do as a professional. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But that's a little bit of a round the way to get to the end, right? But I totally understand, because if we're talking about, say, structure and developing pad-like type structures, if you're limited in branches that you have, you can lay it out to make one giant pad and it'll look good, but you know that in the future you're going to break it up. Now you have two options, right? You can just break it up right now, get rid of all the excess that you don't need, and focus on the key branches you're growing. Or you use more of the branches, make that pad so the client's kind of happy, but you know in the future something has to go. And then so the next time you work on it, something goes. The next time you work it, something goes. And you do get to the end and it does look good, but you kind of lost a little bit of time, right? Because you're trying to
Yeah,
make the
the tree
tree.
spent energy on foliage that you ended up cutting off
Yeah,
later, right? Yeah, makes a lot of
exactly.
sense. Makes a
Uh,
lot of sense.
so so that's kind of the juniper portion of it. Unfortunately, it does not work with any kind of deciduous tree, right? Because deciduous trees require taper and thickness and all that stuff. Like a juniper, if it's a thick branch, well, we can probably bend it. On a deciduous tree, you can't bend it; it'll just snap off. right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or on a juniper, if the branch is maybe not the thickest, but it's interesting, nobody cares that it's not thick enough. On a deciduous tree, when it's thin, it just looks super young. And so you have to spend that time to develop the ideal structure. So people who are focused on, say, more of this instant bonsai or it looking good, I would say rarely ever see an example of a deciduous tree being built like that, because that structure, or at least that procedure on how to build, does not work with a deciduous tree. Or I
Yeah,
mean, it's
or you're building a different looking product, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
maybe your like something that I thought think is very cool in some of Ryan's and like Mariah's deciduous work is like the silhouette is not going to be as compact, but you might have like more like unique movement in the primaries, for example,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so you're kind of estranging some of that compactness and
Hmm.
the like politeness of the design for maybe some more like interesting conifer like movement in some of the primaries
Yeah,
or like
yeah. Uh-huh.
age in the primaries. But yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
Like they're fundamentally making a different end product, you know? So
Yeah, yeah. So
makes a lot
and
of
that's
sense.
fine, right? Hopefully you're going that path and know that's what you're making, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Yep.
As
Makes sense.
opposed to, oh, I'm trying to make this, but then you're doing all these things that are counter to it, right?
100%. 100%.
Right.
Yeah. The thing that I do like about the like every time you touch a tree, like maximize the tree's value. The thing I do
Mhm.
like about that is it gets me to practice the discipline aspect as a hobbyist that I'm trying to build in my bonsai practice, where it's like, you know, if you like always push it down the road and say, oh, I'll clean up the pads, I'll clean up the pads, I'll clean up the pads. Well, maybe you don't practice like actually doing that, right? And you get to that end phase where you have to do that and you're not good at it, right? So I do like that
Yeah.
aspect of like
Mhm.
from a practice perspective, it helps me get good at that thing. Like I ultimately want a good looking tree, right? And so if I
Mhm.
practice making a good looking tree every time, you know, you don't want that to result in you not having the best looking tree in the end result, right? And so that's the
Mhm.
balance that like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to I want to tread with my own practice is like
Mhm.
still want the best product, right? And so I want the process that's going to get me there, and that's what I'm
Yeah,
trying to learn
yeah.
and
And
develop.
I can understand that, right? I mean, practice is good. I mean, I would just be a little careful because, like you're saying, it's a balance, right? You just want to make sure you're not practicing something that's just not going to help you in the long run sometimes. I've often worked with people and they say, well, I tell them, well, you didn't really need this branch, right? Ideally, it would have been better to cut it off. And then they'll usually say, well, I got to practice by wiring. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but you didn't practice your cutting skill, right? And you just wasted a lot of time wiring something. So there is a fine line, right? Yeah, I mean, it's good to practice how to wire, and I never really think of it as practicing wiring. It's really practicing styling and and the fundamentals of wiring what is there on the tree and knowing what to get rid of is so much more important than just putting some wire on a branch, right? And oh, the coils are nice, right? One of the things I got out in Japan is when they say your wiring is good, they don't mean that your actual wiring is good. It means your styling is good. Like
Mm,
just don't care if your wiring is clean, because if your styling is good, your wire is going to be clean. Nobody wires ugly and have great looking trees, right? It's just part of it. And so I mean, I'm not saying for you, but just for people out there, just yeah, just be careful, right? Make sure you're practicing the stuff that really does help you in the long run. Or like you're saying, if it is practice, understand that that's what it is, and know that, well, in the future when you don't have to practice anymore and you're just getting to work doing what you have to do, then you bypass what maybe you used to do in the past and you get more direct to what you're trying to do, right? I mean,
yeah,
at some
I
point
guess that
you
takes a
don't
lot
have
of
to yeah, I mean,
yeah,
at some
that
point you
takes
don't
a
have
lot of
to.
reflection, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly,
Might as well just do
exactly.
it right from the beginning, right? But
Yeah,
practice
yeah,
and
I mean,
play, I
that
guess,
could,
right? Yeah,
because yeah,
that's
it's always hard to change, right? If it gets, not stuck, but if you're in the habit of doing something a certain way, and then later it's so much harder to change. But if you go in knowing that, it's going to change, which that's happened, then that's great. You'll be on the right track. Yeah.
yeah. Well, the thing is, like, if you're really serious about getting better at bonsai, you know, you'll you have to be, I think you kind of mentioned this, alluded to this a little bit earlier as well. Like you really have to be, you have to be honest with yourself on like, are your trees getting better or not year over year
Hmm.
or not, right? And if they're
Yeah.
not, then you have to, like, the best professionals and the best hobbyists are like really examining their approach and saying like, am I doing things right to get the product that I
Hmm.
want or not, right? And
Hmm.
like, yes, it takes a few years or whatever for your, to see if you're, or sometimes many years to see if your process is bearing out, right? But um, you have to constantly be really, introspective, or looking at your,
Yeah. Yeah.
realistically looking at your
Uh
collection and
huh.
seeing
Uh
like,
huh.
am I on the path to meeting my goals or not,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so yeah,
And that really is an exercise in just managing one's ego in a way. Is is being able to say, this is working out, or this, well, that's the easy part. It's working out. It's always working out, right? It's when you look at something and you say, you know what, this is not working out. And I've been telling people this is how to do it too. Oh, that's like a double whammy, right? And that's hard to accept. And I mean, one of the things that, earlier I was talking about, one of the handicaps that people have is they try to make the tree look too good, or at least, let's just say, you do an initial style on a tree and it's the canopy is the size of the finished tree. We know that's not going to work because the tree's going to keep growing. So the finished size is actually going to be bigger, which is a problem. One of the other things that I know, that I see that seems to be holding back is people's understanding, or just like you're saying, kind of the being honest with themselves, right? Maybe just setting that ego aside and just saying, this is working, this is not working. What do I need to adjust? Right? It's not a challenge on how good of a person or how skilled you are. I mean, it's just being real about it. It's not working. If it's been 10 years and it's not working, maybe it's not going to work. Right? I can understand if you want to just, ride it out and see how it goes for a couple of years. That's one thing. And that ego can definitely get in the way. And I find that's one of the biggest challenges for people getting better at things, is just having an ego, and that it doesn't allow them to actually get better because they just believe so much what they're doing is correct all the time. This is not directed toward anybody in particular or anything, but I find
totally,
that
totally.
that gets people. It stops them from getting better a lot of times. And
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not unique to bonsai, right? Like that's
no,
probably
absolutely
anything in
not.
life,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And we're guys, right? And guys tend to have big egos, right? And it's so funny because I find that when I work with women, they don't have that as much, right? And it's funny because they seem to learn bonsai faster, actually, because they don't have
Interesting.
that in the way of them getting better. I mean, not to say that women don't have egos. Some of them do too, but it's just as a generality. It seems like they
Mm.
less of an ego. We have testosterone. We're men. We got to be on top of things, and sometimes that could be a handicap a little bit if we're not careful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that ability to self-assess realistically is the most important skill in like improving at anything in life,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And it's something we should all, especially as builders, or like with that goal in mind, something that we want to do for such a long time period. We have to practice that skill of being really realistic with ourselves.
Yeah,
I think we have a great community in the U.S. for bonsai that is only going to grow more, which I'm really excited about, and
yeah.
it's cool to be a part of that growing group. So we already talked about it a tiny bit, but I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, what does the client relationship look like for you that leads to success in the expo? Like, somebody approaches you today and is like, hey, I want to have my trees in the expo, starting from, maybe I've got a few trees that are in potential
Mhm.
expo quality but aren't expo trees yet. What is the prescription that you give them? Oh, it's like, oh, come see me X times a year. We need to do this and that. Like, we need to plan X years in advance. What does that process look like for you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, generally, when I first start working with somebody new, or work with somebody for the first time, I really try to get an understanding of what kind of styles they like, what kind of bonsai that they like. Again, that kind of alignment of, do we both kind of have the same kind of goals, right? If they're trying to come, if they're If they're looking for a style that's not something that I practice or know how to practice, then generally we'll tend to part ways, right? So I've been fortunate enough that I have a number of clients that kind of align what I'm doing, and yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Is partly I tell them, okay, these are some of the things, if we're looking at books together and I say this is what you want, then I'll tell them, okay, this is what's required, right? These are the things that we need to do, health wise, environment wise, all the little technical things that, if you want deciduous trees and you live in an area that has bad water, hey, guess what? You're going to need an RO system. If you don't want an RO system, then you're out of luck. It's pretty straightforward at that point, you know. So I tell them, okay, these are some of the things that I would recommend doing, and if you follow them, then you're going to have more success. At least that's me saying that, right, from the experience that I have. After that, it's just really, are they willing to kind of implement those things? Are they interested in doing all the things that's required to have the tree? And a big part of it, going back to just being honest with yourself or just being real about it, is people talk all the time. Yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that. We've heard that a million times, right? But when it really comes down to it, did they really mean it? So one of the first things I ask people when they talk about the expo, for example, I just asked them straight up. I say, do you want to put a tree in the expo because you want to participate and be part of the show? Or do you want to win? I just asked them straight up, right? And sometimes that's hard for people to answer because they're trying to be modest, or they feel like if you say, well, yeah, I want to win a prize, it's kind of looked down upon in a way. Oh, well, look at this, arrogant a-hole, and all they want to do is win and all that stuff. It's like, well, it's not always about that. Sometimes it is, for sure, but it's just like, well, I get it, right? Who doesn't like to win? It's fun to win. If anything, it might say just kind of reinforces all the work that you've put into something, right? And you say, okay, this is recognition for just all that I've done, and potentially it gives you some kind of meaning in that, which is okay. But I think a big part of it is just having honesty in yourself and what you really want. And if that's what they want, then I can help them with that, right? I'll do the best I can and recommend everything I can recommend to help them in that path, including being honest about, yeah, this tree can't win. It can get into the show, but it can't win, right? For whatever reason that I feel is the case. Or I say, yeah, this is the material that can make you be a contender. So I guess the theme is really just being really honest to each other about what is it that we all want. Yeah, if all my clients want all the time, that'd be great. I mean, I feel good about that. But it's really up to what they want. It's not necessarily what I want. I just want people to have really good trees, and it just tends to be associated with getting into the expo or potentially winning. But I've been pretty fortunate about having clients that have decided to take that path and say, I do want to make the best tree that I can make, and they're willing to do what it takes. If we got to work on it five
Mm,
times a year, then that's what it is, right? There's no, oh, we'll just skip this, right? That doesn't work when you're working at a higher level. It
yeah.
might work at
Whenever
a
you're
certain
at the
level.
peak, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Whenever you're pushing the boundaries of what's possible, you can't slack in any of the avenues, right? It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the reason you get the product you get is because you're so locked in on each of the
Yeah.
components that make give the tree the ability to get to that highest level, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, it could be super stressful too, right? Because when you're working at that kind of level, a bunch of stuff can go wrong too. You think about Olympic athletes, and they're just, I mean, you could say that they're at peak performance, and all it takes is just a wrench in that gear, and everything just collapses, and injuries happen. So, and that's what happens in Japan also, right? You get a tree that's in kokofu, and let's just say it's just at a super high level, and we're doing everything that we can possibly do right. Hopefully we're lucky also on top of that, and one little thing can kind of break it all down. So
Yeah.
it can be
I think any,
stressful.
I think anyone who's done anything at a high level or near their peak of ability, you don't have to be like the top chess player to experience the tension of
Mm,
competing with someone
good
at your
point.
same ELO level, right? It's like
Yeah, yeah.
even if you have a 1,000 chess rating or whatever, I'm not super familiar with chess, but playing against somebody else's 1,050 or whatever, like that's going to be
Yeah.
tense. Like you have to
Yeah.
make every decision to the best that you can, right, to make that top level product. So it makes
Hmm.
sense that in high level bonsai, there's that same tension. So
Yeah.
whenever you're putting this prescription together, like your client has been honest with you on their goals, how do you balance like the teaching the person how to make that product that they want and like doing the work to make the product, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a really good point because I run into that kind of back and forth, right? Because inevitably, the truth behind it all is that, say, for example, I've been doing bonsai for a very long time, and I do it a certain way, okay, and people are seeking out that way. For example, I do tell some of my clients. Well, no, I tell all my clients this, not just some. But again, it's just this honesty, right? If they want a tree that, say, is at a level that they can't get to by themselves and they need my help, right? Do they want to spend time learning it? And we know what happens to trees that we learn on. They're sometimes they don't work out, right? Mistakes are made, right? The wrong branch gets cut off or too many branches get kept, whatever the case is. And so there's this fine line of, okay, again, we're trying to get this tree from A to B. How long do we want to take doing it? And so, for example, if, say, a client of mine says, Peter, that's why I hire you. You're the professional. I want you to get this tree to a level that I know I cannot get, like the client. Right? That's why I'm paying you, Peter. Great. I do whatever needs to be done to the best of my ability, and I try to get the tree there. When we get into a situation where, say, some of my other clients, where they say, well, I want to participate in it too. I want to do some stuff. I want to do some of the wiring. I want to do some of the style or be part of the decision making. But that works out fine. But there is a little extra that there is a piece of that where the tree might not be at a level that, say, I expect, or it might not be at, say, the quote unquote winning level, right? Because someone was practicing on it. They decided to do the wiring themselves. So is it going to be the ideal? Is it going to match what a professional can do? Probably not, right? But they're learning and that's what they want. And so we just have to be realistic about it and just go in knowing, if you're going to do some of the work, then it's going to be at a certain level. I'll do the best I can to help you with that, of course, right? I'm not going to deny anybody of working on the trees, but we also have to be realistic, right? Because when people practice on stuff, it doesn't come out right all the time, and so we have to roll with that, right? And hopefully, it doesn't affect the tree too much, but it could. It could. I mean, that's a possibility,
Yeah.
especially when we're learning. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, if somebody was doing it just as good as you are, whenever,
they
then
probably
they
won't
would
need
be the
me, right? Yeah,
professional. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, so I mean, that's something that I struggle with is like I want to become good at like very good at making bonsai trees, right? So like my dream scenario would be
Hmm.
to or like my goal is to be able to make a, tree that like I would want my tree to look indistinguishable from a professional's tree, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm curious on your thoughts on like that process or like what advice you would have for someone that's trying to like maybe I'm not going to be able to make, every kind of juniper or make every kind of species at the same level as a professional, right? But let's say I want to like what would be your recommendations for someone who wants to try to as a hobbyist
Yeah.
recreate, maybe not in mass, but still have that like
Mhm.
top level quality of tree? Is it possible and
Yeah.
like what's your advice for it?
Absolutely, it's possible, right? I mean, it just requires a great skill. If I was working with somebody and they say, Peter, I want to do the majority of the work. I want to be really good at bonsai. From the I guess from the time side of it. Okay, so there's kind of this two kind of aspects of that. Is that one, somebody that's doing it as hobby just isn't going to do it as many hours as, say, I do it, right? Because I do it every day. For those that are professionals out there, I mean, we do this every day. There's no days off, right? Kind of thing. Maybe you have the luxury of some days off, but you're doing it all the time. Okay, I might not be working on trees, but I'm always thinking about, well, when do I have to water it? Blah, 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 and so forth. Is this working out? Is not working out? So, just from a time perspective, it is definitely going to favor the professionals, right? they just do it for so many more hours, right? Than say somebody that's doing it as a hobby. I mean, my advice for somebody that wants to get as good as they can and maybe even compete with a professional, it just requires a lot of effort on them just really maximize the efficiency of how they're learning bonsai. I think about what I learned or how I learned bonsai before I went to Japan. I was taking classes with Boone. I saw the trees that he was making and I thought they were great. And so I was like, you know what? I need to learn from this guy. Right. So I tried to be as efficient as possible for the limited time I worked with him. And I was doing his intensive program, which was only 3 times a year for 3 days. But some of the things that I did is okay, I went there, I sponged up as much as he told me, practical hands-on stuff to theoretical stuff, on paper. I try to get whatever I can. I take that back home. I practice it, right or wrong. I practice as much as possible. The next time I see him, I bring what I've worked on. I bring it to him and say, "Hey, look, this is what I did. What do I need to improve?" He says, "Okay, do this, change this, and so forth." I take that back home and I try to practice it, right? And that's how I think I got better. I think all you can do really is just try to be as efficient as possible as in learning it when you are working with a professional, right? And in many ways, you can actually become better than some professionals, right? I mean, everybody's different. So, I mean, I've run into people who've done full on apprenticeships in Japan and they are not good at bonsai at all, right? They did not use that time well. And within the apprentice kind of circle, we joke around those things, right? It's like, okay, well, someone learned how to pour tea for 5 years, right? And you're like, really? That's all they got? You would think whatever the circumstance is, right? It might not be their fault. Who knows, right? All I can really say is, yeah, just you got to study hard, look at books, ask questions, talk to people who you like their work, get their ideas, no matter how minuscule or how fundamental or basic that people think it is, or oh, that's just a dumb question. Now I find sometimes the simplest questions or the what would consider dumb questions lead to great discussions and everybody's like, oh, I didn't even think of it that way. I didn't even know that. Right. Just always having an attitude of learning new things and not being held back by, well, no, I do it this way, right? I only do it this way because that's the right way. And it's just not like that. So yeah, be very open and just focus on your studies.
That makes sense. And I think efficiency is definitely the key just because you're going to have so many less hours. So if you
Hmm.
want to get as good, you have to be working
Yeah.
smarter on that process, right? But you still need, the thing about bonsai is you still need to do a lot of hours. Even if
Yeah.
you're maximally efficient, like you still need to do a lot of hours or
Hmm.
you're just
Hmm.
not going to get there. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so what's your take on the I've asked multiple kind of professionals this question, so I'm curious on your thoughts, but what's your take on the learning from multiple teachers versus learning from just one teacher on your bonsai journey?
Yeah.
Because, that could be seen as inefficient, right? Having multiple teachers, but it also is open. So I don't know. What's your
Yeah,
thought on that?
yeah. I suppose this is probably not going to work 100% of the time, but the way I've talked to people about that is usually I tell them find somebody, professional or hobbyist, doesn't matter. Make sure you like what they're doing. You're seeing the trees that they're creating, and you say, "That's what I want to do. That's what I want to create." And generally, I would say just learn from that person, right? Just again sponge up whatever they can tell you on whatever they do because you know that if at least you copy them you're going to get that same result for the most part, right? Because if nothing else, say you're just super uncreative and you're just copying, you're still going to get trees like that in a way, right? But also knowing that once you've kind of maxed that out, you've learned everything you could from them, know that, well, there's always more to learn. And so when you encounter, say, another professional or another hobbyist, and they're making something that's a little different, and you're like, you know what, I kind of like what they're doing with that. Now you talk with them and you say, okay, what is it that you're doing? And you might find, well, it's just an adjustment to the approach that you're already working, or you find out it's a completely different approach. The key is really just being able to adjust, right? And have an open mind to those new ideas. And you can decide, I don't really like it, or I really like it. And the key is that at least you ask yourself that, right? And it's not always a
Yeah.
rejection and say, oh, this is, I don't know how many times I've heard from people is that, well, this is what I was taught. And I was like, that's not an excuse for anything, right? It's like,
This is
you
what
want
I
to limit
taught
your,
was taught, but did it
yeah,
work or
yeah.
not?
Did
Yeah,
it
exactly.
work, right? Or okay, the trees aren't looking that great, and you're like, well, that was what I was taught. I was like, well, the trees still didn't look that great. That's
Yeah.
not a valid
That's the
excuse.
ultimate barometer. Yeah, it makes
Yeah,
sense. That's introspection is really important.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's for me the thing I struggle with is like, I see Ryan's work on raw junipers that I really like, and I
Mhm.
see your work on deciduous trees, and I see, Adam's work on Shohin junipers, and I'm like, oh man,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love like I want to be able to do all these things, right? And
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
I can't learn how to do all those things from one person necessarily. Or maybe I can, I don't know, but that's what
Yeah,
I've struggled with sometimes is like sometimes different people have the product that you want, right? And
yeah,
so
yeah. Well, I think your approach to that is a little bit more refined than like most people, right? So you're looking at these individual profession and you're saying, okay, I like what they're doing with that particular species, and that other professional, I like what they're doing. And yeah, it makes sense, right? To then learn from multiple people because you already have the mindset that they're doing things differently and the results there, that's what I like to see. So and then it's just on you to not blend it, right? If you blend it too much, then it doesn't quite work out, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh
That's the
so
critique I've gotten is like, oh, if you start to blend these things, like they're interconnected systems, right? So like, I want to make this as general as possible,
yeah,
but
yeah.
like maybe somebody's horticultural approach leads to a certain target product, right? And then
Mhm.
if you try to say take somebody's techniques and apply them to somebody else's horticultural basis, then maybe it
Yeah.
doesn't work the same way, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I try to do in bonsai, whatever species I work with, I try to recognize what are some of the core or key fundamental things that are very similar. Okay, well, trees generally need to be watered, right? So say that's a general thing. And then you kind of go on a different direction based on the different types of tree. So I do spend a lot of time trying to find, okay, what are some of the core things that we know is generally true about all of these things? So at least you have a solid foundation that, yeah, there's no tree that you don't water, for example. And again, I'm just very basic stuff. And then building on top of that, all the nuances of, watering a juniper might be different than watering a deciduous tree, or the soil mix is different to yield a certain result. Yeah, absolutely. And that's so important. And I'm glad you brought that up. Is that yes, a lot of the horticultural stuff does is part of the process of leading to a certain result. And so if I said I use this certain type of soil and it's part of my, routine to get this style of tree or this kind of structure in this tree, you can't deviate from that and think, oh, well, I'll get the same if you use a different soil mixture. So, I mean, you just recognizing that is so important and it gives you a huge advantage already. A lot of people just don't. A lot of people tend to fall into the it's close, or it's close enough, or it's good enough, right? And then so what do you get, right? You get close bonsai, you get good enough bonsai, right? So
Yeah, it makes sense. Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate you kind of taking us through all of your thoughts on that. And, I think these are questions that a lot of people run into and we don't always say out loud. So I think it's cool to have that conversation in like a respectful manner. I want to also talk to you a little bit about, and you alluded to this earlier, there's some things that are different about Japan. So I'd love to know a little bit about your apprenticeship under kind of Tanaka-san at Aichien. And now you have apprentices of your own, right? So, or I've had, so I'm curious of, how are you taking your experience that you had in Japan and how are you adapting that to the US? Would love to like know a little bit more about that.
okay, yeah, I mean, an apprenticeship. My apprenticeship experience in Japan was overall a really great experience, right? I lived there for several years. I did bonsai every day. I mean, that's great, right? You're living the dream, right? It was kind of cool when I started my apprenticeship because I was like, I don't have to worry about anything except learning how to do bonsai or being around bonsai. I didn't have to worry about a car payment, a mortgage, any of that stuff. I just had to wake up, do what the boss said, and just work on bonsai. So it was funny because it was kind of refreshing, right? Because I started my apprenticeship when I was 31. So at that time, we know what it's like to pay rent or, make a certain amount of money and all that. And it's like, oh, okay. I suppose the downside is like you just moved back in with your parents, for example, and now you have to follow their rules, right? So, and I was cool with that. I mean, I went to Japan not to be like crazy and wild. I went there as okay, this is a required step if I really want to do this, and so I treated it that way. Yeah, I mean, the differences between Japan and the US, I mean, from a bonsai standpoint, I mean, they've done it longer in Japan, right? I mean, I think generally it's recognized that they are the ones that made bonsai what it is today. And it's grown in the rest of the world and everybody's building off of that, right? And people are creating different styles and offshoots off of that too, which is great. It keeps things interesting. When you get into why is it that they created or what is it about bonsai that we all kind of got attracted to, right? And it's for a lot of different reasons. Some people do it purely because it's a very hands-on thing. People like horticultural things, all the way to people appreciating the aesthetics, or at least, let's say, the Japanese aesthetics. Recently, I've been doing a little bit more study on that, and one of the main differences, really, in kind of aesthetics in Japan and the U.S. And it's so complicated because it's so opposite from in a way. In Japan, to keep it in simplistic terms, there's a kind of a longer contemplation of what is considered aesthetically beautiful, or the criteria for aesthetic for things that are beautiful is very different than what we see in the US, right? Like I grew up in the US, right? I'm Western. I'm not Eastern, right? I just went to Japan. So I think in a very more analytical, I use that a lot more. That's very much a Western way of doing things. We analyze things. We say, okay, I look at this tree, it's got these points, it's got these points, these points. That means it's good. That looks good. And then you look at from, say, the Japanese view of it, and it has nothing to do with that at all. And it's so difficult to describe what is it that they're looking at, right? And it all stems from their culture, religious, just the way they did things in isolation for so long versus, say, Europeans, us in the US. So the aesthetics part is difficult to explain for sure. I mean, people have written giant books about it with very complicated words, right? They try to and I find that sometimes the small books written by people from Japan or that live that is a little bit more comprehensible, actually, because we tend to make things super technical, right? And it kind of falls into that, when we were talking about age earlier, how okay, we do all these steps, we want it to be old, we do things to make it look older than it really is, and then you get to the end and you're like, okay, all that technical stuff was okay, but that's not the important part, right? There's something more, and I think that's the part. So and that's why I still believe that if somebody wanted to do an apprenticeship, the best experience is still going to Japan because you get to live in that, right? When you're here, you only get to talk about it.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
you're saying by going to Japan, like, yes, you might learn the same techniques that you could learn here, but there's a cultural and understanding of what bonsai means and like an aesthetic sense that you really can
Yeah.
only develop there. Interesting.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's at least currently, that's how I feel about it. It's the aesthetics that they develop. It just requires you to just be in it and live it. It's hard to look at it from, say, the outside in a way. And I'm not saying that okay, it's a crutch if somebody doesn't do that, but I do feel that that is something to experience. And even if it's for a short period of time, anybody that's interested in bonsai, or at least want to have a better understanding of it, you don't have to do it. Say you don't have to follow Japanese aesthetics to do bonsai, right? There's other aesthetics you can follow, and it changes bonsai into a different thing. The key is that if you just want to have a better understanding of it all, right? Going there, living it, or just experiencing it for whatever time you can, allocate to that. It's valuable that we just don't have here. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
I can with my current apprentice, I can teach them all the techniques, and I can try to convey this, but they're not living in it still, right? They're still going to have kind of this Western mentality because that's what they are. We grew up in this. And
Yeah,
so we think a
absolutely.
very certain way, and to suddenly change to a different way of thinking, it's hard to change, hard to understand when it's just so foreign, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
such an interesting point. I was talking with Julian last week for the
mm,
podcast, and he was explaining, to me, wabi sabi, for example,
yeah,
was just
yeah,
like beauty in imperfection, right? That's like kind of
hmm,
the trite version of it from a U.S. perspective, maybe. But he
yeah.
was going into like this deeper cultural meaning behind it and its connection to like deep connection to bonsai and Japanese culture. That was really interesting to me to hear. Like this, there's so much more depth to these words than I knew.
Mm.
But I'm wondering, like, do you think do you need to understand that to make a high quality bonsai, like a Japanese bonsai? Do you think you need to understand those things, or do you have to have some innate sense for it? I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
That's very interesting, right? Because from our end in the Western side, is we think about it as, and I even just said it, right? Okay, you got to go there and try to learn it, right? And in many ways, that's still a Western way of looking at it. So you go there and you just try to learn it, right? And it turns out on the other end, there does seem to be a required kind of sense of it, right? Which is probably why I say you have to live it in a way. It's like, how do you develop this sense of, say, their aesthetics, right? You just have to be surrounded by it so much and so long that you just get a feel for it. And is it required to, say, create great bonsai? I'll go out on a limb and say, I think for the bonsai that I fell in love with or really love right now, I'd say yes, you do need that. However much of it you can get, right? I mean, I don't think it's any different than if somebody wanted to be a professional at anything. You try to find, okay, well, where is it happening? Where did it start? That kind of thing. You want to be a fashion designer. Well, you don't go to Kansas to do that. Okay, you go to New York, you go to France, you go to Italy, you go to those areas where they're living it. There's a sense of it there that made it to what it is, why we like it now, right? And that's the kind of cool thing about all these different countries, right? Whatever they end up doing, whatever topic, that thing that they're doing, is that some cultures just seem to have a sense of that thing, and learning or experiencing it seems like that's a good idea, to do that. Can you still create a great, really nice bonsai without having that? I think you can. I mean, you can go kind of the formula way, right? Okay, well, if we have, and I tell people this all the time, right? Because not everybody is super creative. Can you teach creativity? That's a huge question that people argue about all the time. In our mindset in the West, it's like, in a way, we say, yeah, okay, we identify what it is that this is really, why this is really good, and you just make sure that we reproduce that. You follow step one, step two, step three. And in a way, it makes it very easy to understand, right? Because you can kind of follow this sequence of things and say, as long as I do these sequences well, I'll have something fairly decent. And I agree, you're going to have something decent, but it's going to be tough to say that it's going to be, say, a masterpiece, right? I think those
Interesting.
kind of things are beyond those things. But what is that? That's hard to explain, but that doesn't mean that discourages you or anybody from just not doing bonsai or anything artistic. It's just knowing, well, this is the way of the world, right? I'm not going to be a super great piano player because I didn't start when I was like 3, right? And when people start learning music when they're really young, their brains are wired differently than my 45-year-old brain now trying to learn the piano. It's just not going to happen. Are there cases where it happens? Of course, I'm sure there's an exception, but it's just not realistic, right? I would say that can everybody create really nice bonsai? Absolutely. You can follow a lot of techniques, refine those techniques, look at really great trees, and in a way kind of mimic, and you add your flair to it. That's all great for sure. That's a lot of people are gonna be happy with that, right?
Hmm.
Most people would be perfectly happy with that. Like, I just want to have trees that look like that, and I'd be perfectly happy. It doesn't have to be anything more than that, right?
It's a
For
little
sure.
bit of an interesting, it's a little bit of a departure from what I would say the pure like builder or analytical mindset would be, right? Where you're saying there's this kind of innate or learned component of the end like that affects the end product, right? As opposed to it's a series of steps that makes it, right? Like a formula.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering like how do you differentiate a masterpiece from a good bonsai? Like, do you look at trees in
Yeah.
your own collection and you're like, this is a masterpiece and this is a good bonsai? How do you like what makes that differentiation?
Yeah, that's tough, right? Because again, we tend to fall back on, okay, well, let's break it down, right? We look at this thing, we break it down. It seems like the masterpieces that are out there, or the trees that are just related to bonsai. The trees that are really good are the ones that just seem to, you walk by all these trees, and this one tree invokes some kind of emotion that just stops you, and you just want to look. You can't even really explain it. It's hard. Oh, why does this one tree stand? And I don't even know if you need to explain it, but there's something about this tree that stands out more than any other tree. And yeah, we can spend time breaking it down, but it's just this complex combination of things that just makes it just one of a kind, or let's say a masterpiece. And that's something that I think is difficult to teach. All we can really do is kind of hint around it, and that's why there's so few masterpieces in general of anything out there. Right?
Yeah.
We can spend a lot of time breaking it down and saying that's what makes it a masterpiece, but I think all the people who do it that way does understand that, as much as we try to break it down and say these are the key points that make it a masterpiece, there's still something somewhere there that we can't make it as simple as that.
Hmm.
It's just maybe the culmination of all that thing. It just happens to work out. Yeah, it's
Interesting.
I can't explain it, but it becomes more of an emotional thing, a feeling kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there trees in
Yeah,
yours or your client collections that you would consider masterpieces? And I'm not like trying to get you to, I'm
yeah,
not trying
yeah,
to get you to brag. I mean it in like a serious
yeah,
way of
yeah.
like, are there ones that you've experienced where you're like, yes, this meets that bar for me?
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting because, and this is so tough and it seems so unfair also. The trees in my collection, I think I have, from my trees and client trees and random trees that I have, the ones I consider are like just really great. There's only two or three, I think. Yeah, maybe and I'm pretty lucky that I feel that way, right? And not to say that everything I do is great or anything. They're almost, how do I describe it? When you look at the tree, and they're not trees that are like technically excellent. Because if you break it down, you're like, well, there's these issues that we would think we would normally try to fix. Okay, maybe some taper issues and all that stuff. But it's just something about the combination of the whole that just may you never get tired of looking at it. Right. You can always stop. I've had it in the yard for 5, 10 years, but you can always just like, yeah, that's really cool. I really like that. It never gets old, right? That's about as much I can. That's about the best I can explain it. Is that it's just, yeah. I can't.
It has a presence to it that's
Yeah,
undeniable.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
undeniable. Now, having said that, they all happen to be fairly large trees, right? Which is why I'm a fan of larger trees. I seem to get that more from larger trees as opposed to smaller trees. I don't know what it is about that. But it almost kind of, I don't want to say it's like dumb luck, but it's this culmination of everything that's happened to the tree with just a little bit of luck that just makes it stand out. It's almost like someone. it just can't be too like perfect or manufactured feel. I don't know if I'm saying this in a good way, but or in the right way. There almost has to be a little bit of a sense of when this tree was being built, it wasn't trying to be a masterpiece. It
Hmm.
just became one.
It
I know
sounds
that's
very
super vague.
it
I
sounds
know that's
very
super vague.
wabi. Well, it's funny.
Yeah, right.
You're using you're using that phrasing, and that was
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
some of that phrasing was exactly how Julian
What
described
Julian was saying.
some of the principles of wabi sabi to me, which is interesting. So there is, I guess, like a an innate or like a learned component of the aesthetic that is maybe not easily describable but is apparent, right? And that's really
Mhm.
cool. I mean, now everybody's going to be out there trying to find the next masterpiece or make the next
Yeah, yeah,
masterpiece,
right.
but or declare declare the next
Yeah,
masterpiece. But
yeah, yeah, exactly,
that's
exactly.
cool. That's
Yeah,
cool.
it's almost yeah. I mean, I thinking about it now. Yeah, I feel very much that yeah, a big component of it is that there was not an attempt to try to make it a masterpiece. That seems like that's just part of it,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is very much a Japanese aesthetic thing or Eastern aesthetic thing. Is this kind of as they would say, maybe a lack of ego, right? There was never an attempt to make anything great or this thing
Hmm.
great. It just became great. And that's it's tough because it like I said before, it makes it so unfair, right? Because for those of us that are trying to make something really nice, it in a way doesn't allow us to reach that because we're trying too hard. We're
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
do everything just right to make it perfect, and it ends up not being ideal. And the ones that wasn't, kind of looked at it that way became kind of this masterpiece. And there's something undeniable about it because trees like that, you just put it out there and you don't have to say anything. And people from all different skill levels. They look at it and they stop and they said, there's something different about this. They can't explain it, but it catches their attention. There's something about this that everybody seems to recognize.
Well, for me, I want to first, I would love to make a masterpiece in my lifetime, I guess. But my first step in my goal is like, I want to make like a very well crafted tree, right? Like
Mhm.
maybe I can't control whether or maybe I don't have the innate ability to, exactly hit that masterpiece tier aesthetic right away, right? But I can control, like, am I practicing bonsai precisely and reaching a kind of pushing the tree to where it can get as far as it can get across the kind of horticultural, technical, and aesthetic tiers, right? So that'll be an interim goal for me. But now I've got masterpiece on the brain, so
Yeah.
hopefully in my lifetime. But we'll see.
you
That's
know,
really
I,
really
I,
cool
yeah, and
topic.
I think that just the mindset of just saying, hey, look, I'm working on this tree. I'm doing the best I can. Don't so much think of masterpiece. Just say I'm working it. I'm doing the best I can. And I think those masterpieces just kind of stem from that, right?
Mm, mm,
Without saying I'm going to make this into a I think going in and saying I'm going to make this a masterpiece may have caused it to not be one. I
interesting.
feel right.
Interesting. There's some degree of serendipity and also like you said, the lack of ego in the construction
Mhm,
process, right?
mhm.
The tree, if you set it up to, if you hype it up from too young an age, then it never reaches its potential. Apparently,
Yeah.
I'm just teasing. Uh, So, so on the apprenticeship topic, yeah, I guess I mean, would you ever tell like Travis, for example, like, hey, to get that last phase of your like to really reach your full potential in bonsai, you have to go and apprentice in Japan for some period, or you have to include some kind of training or time in Japan as along your journey. Like, how do you bridge that gap of like you can't get that innate understanding of the aesthetic in the U.S.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, for somebody like Travis or anybody that wants to be, and I understand, right? There are circumstances that doesn't allow you to go to Japan, right? Travis is married, for example. Some people want to do an apprenticeship, but they can't because they have other obligations. Or they can't afford it, or just whatever the case is. So, I mean, I still feel it's the best to go to Japan so you get that experience. I mean, we can experience all the Western stuff here, just being here. Say if you're from the US, you can go to Japan, you're going to come back to the US. You lived Western aesthetics, right? Okay, for the most part. So you say, okay, well, I can't go to Japan, but okay, what are some alternatives to that? Can you still get some sense? Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Can you do an apprenticeship here and then try to do a short-term apprenticeship there, or at least go there from time to time to just see what's happening there, right? Just a little taste. I mean, the reality of it is just like talking about, learning bonsai, right? It's how much time you can get into doing those things. The more exposure you get to it, and the efficient use of your time, of course, is going to help in that. If say somebody can't go to Japan and they do an apprenticeship here, which they're gonna get pretty good, I still would recommend, okay, well, try to go to Japan and just go see some of the big shows, or visit a garden and just talk with their teacher if it's a possibility. Do a short term thing, right? Be there for a couple of weeks, just try to live it a little bit, try to see what they're seeing. If anything, just so you can understand what is it that they're doing. Is there something you're missing? Is there something more that you can experience? I mean, that's about all you can do, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
so
there's no way around that.
yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense. Well, I think the underpinning to that though is that you're saying that bonsai and Japanese aesthetic are like fully linked, right? Like to do bonsai, you have to have an appreciation for the Japanese aesthetic, right? Um, and if that's
I
the
would
case, then yeah,
say,
like you have like how else are you going to learn that other than
yeah,
understanding that culture, right?
yeah, yeah. And all I'm saying is that Japan, or at least their culture there, has created bonsai for what I believe most of us liked about bonsai. Like, we saw some bonsai, we practiced it a little bit, we said, I really like doing this. My feeling is that the Japanese they're credited for that.
Interesting.
And so to say reject it or not experience it seems like kind of a loss, right? Because I feel I got into bonsai because there was something about Japanese aesthetics that I like. I didn't understand it. I still kind of don't understand it, right? I'm still learning about it to this day. There's something about it that I liked, and it'd just be a shame if I didn't try to figure it out more. I mean, I did the best I could. I did an apprenticeship, but I was only there for 3 years. It's not like I was there for 40 years or anything like that. What I think of now, if I had lived there for my entire life, I might have a very different view, or a more complex view of their aesthetics. So I mean, even for me that did an apprenticeship, I only still got a little piece. So I think just a recognition of that would be good for everybody. And it surprises me that I've worked with people, or met some people who've done bonsai for decades, and they're making nice trees. It's not like they're making bad trees. They're working hard, learning as much as they can. They're learning from different professionals, and they've never been to Japan, right? And it seems so odd to me. It's like, it seems like, wouldn't you want to know what is it that they're seeing? What is it that they're doing? Right? It just seems like that's an easy gap to try to remedy, or
Yeah, yeah,
experience.
yeah.
Just a simple flight there,
Absolutely,
and just to see what's
absolutely.
happening.
Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed going to Japan and like uh, that avenue of like being able to explore the culture there more deeply because of a
Mm,
kind of shared understanding through bonsai is so fun for me. But maybe
mhm.
it's not for everyone. But I think you're opening my mind a little bit here. I had a conversation with Julian, and I think he was trying to tell me a similar thing to what you just
Mm,
articulated, but it took me a little bit of time to distill. It
yeah.
sounds like you're saying there's this, and stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but it
Okay.
sounds
Okay.
like you're saying there's this essence that draws people to bonsai that the Japanese have managed to capture in their system and aesthetic of making trees. So to deny that or not at least seek to understand it, you might be missing out on something that speaks to people at like a fundamental level. Is that kind of
Yeah.
what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't mean that, after you've experienced it, and you might say, well, that's not my thing. That's not really why I did it. That's perfectly fine. But how would you know, right? If you never experienced it. And again, I've just run into too many people here that assume that they know what's happening over there, or they assume that's what they wanted to do, or that's how it's done over there, without ever stepping foot there and really understanding what is it that they're doing. It's not as simple as just, well, I look at these books and oh, that's what they do. It's just not as simple as that, right? People try to make it sound like that, but there's so much more to it, and it's so yeah. On my end, it's like why not? It doesn't hurt to understand, right? And you may like it or you may not, right? But what's the harm in understanding? You might get something out of it. I mean, that seems like that would be so much more valuable. The chance of getting something more.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess so. I guess kind of relating this to the calling cries, I guess, in the bonsai community, or like the easy sayings that people would repeat. Like somebody might write off somebody's approach because it's traditional bonsai, quote unquote, right?
Yeah,
Versus like somebody else might also, say like, oh, that's instant bonsai. But saying those kind of phrases is like not maybe understanding the full depth of somebody's approach, right? Which makes a
yeah.
lot of sense to me.
Yeah, yeah, and it's very interesting because when I was learning bonsai here in the U.S. and I did I learned whatever I could and I did things. It turned out that I became very close-minded in what I did. Like you did this, and I had the assumption that that's what it was like in Japan, right? Very strict. We have the kind of those stereotypes that we think that's how they think, right? And the funny thing is that when I went to Japan and I did my apprenticeship, is that the styling of trees or how I view trees actually became way more free and open once I
Mm,
started doing my apprenticeship. And it turns out they're not as stiff as everybody thinks they are. The changes or the differences might be much more subtle. It's not just this wacky, wild, okay, do whatever you want, but the changes are much more subtle, and being seeing that is important. But they can be very free in what they do in bonsai, and it's just this lack of understanding that or experiencing that, right? That you just don't know if you only hear. I've heard people say, "Oh, they do it this way in Japan," and that person has never been there.
yeah. Or
And you're
lacks
like,
the context of
okay,
why in that situation it was done that way because of the
yeah,
aesthetic the aesthetic
yeah,
understanding.
yeah,
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
hmm hmm yeah. Or they're just going off of like one example of something, and they think that applies to everything. And so you get a little bit of this kind of misinformation that's out there that I guess that's how they do it there. You're like, well, you might want to find out yourself.
Yeah. So I've also been asking various professionals this question of like, what would they what would they call the hallmark of their own style? Like, how does somebody recognize a Peter tea tree? How would you, in your own words, kind of describe your aesthetic? Like, would you just say Japanese bonsai, or would you say a different? Like, how would you describe your aesthetic yourself?
Yeah, I think the difference is my aesthetics is heavily influenced by Japanese aesthetics for sure. But I'm not Japanese, right? I didn't live there for decades, so my aesthetics or at least my mindset is very Western. So there are some things that I do that might be more westernized than say Japanese life. The interesting thing is when I was studying at Aichien with Mr. Tanaka, is that his styling of trees or how they developed, and he's the fourth generation of that nursery, right? And his son is actually going to be the fifth generation that I heard recently, which is pretty cool. They had a tendency and of actually doing things a little different or out of the ordinary. Again, it's not some crazy like just super wild thing that's in your face, but so it's a little bit more subtle. But they were actually known as, or they prided themselves in doing things that were a little bit more off, or at least I always saw it as just appreciating the tree for what it is and trying not to force it into any one shape, right? And sometimes that happens in Japan too. I mean, it happens to everybody. We have this idea of this is the shape we want, and it gets a little too forced. And at Aichien, they were a little bit more open to different styles and different shapes. There's some fundamental things that are very similar, structural stuff, ramification, having a lot of branches, those are some key things that kind of stayed the same, but you got some interesting movements and interesting lines that were, say, not normal. I don't have an example of this, but when I was an apprentice, I wrote a number of blog posts, and one of it is, if people have remember reading it or those that have read it, I did a blog post about this trident maple that's been in the family for I don't know how long, 80 years or something like that. And it's this perfectly straight trunk, trident, no taper. The root system looks like club feet. It goes to the left. There's a cascading branch that drops almost straight down with a bunch of ramification. And you would look at this tree and you'd be like, this is not Japanese bonsai, right? The ramification looks like Japanese ramification, but the structure itself is so far from anything that is considered normal, right? But they're but beautiful about it. And I think a big part of it is just the age of it. Because if it was really young and it was only 10 years old, I think even they would say, eh, you know. But the fact that it's this a certain age, it became kind of uh, really cool and different. And so I do appreciate that. When I was in Japan, it wasn't all just this what we would think of these standard styles that we tend to see, which is a generalization, right? Because it's hard to most of us when we think of Japanese bonsai, we look at books and we see the silhouette and we can't really see what's inside, and we say, "Oh, this is what it's supposed to be." When you see it in person, like when you go to Kokufu or something, it's a very different looking tree in person, and you're like, you start seeing all the nuances and things like that. So the interesting thing at IGN is that I got a little bit of that in, you know, I don't tend to make things too wild necessarily, right? But I do like to kind of play with things in a subtle way that's less traditional, but it's not in your face. So it's I think I think it's a little bit more charming, I feel, to
Hmm.
do it that way. That, only the person with that, really paying attention will catch on. It's not so apparent that, oh yeah, it's right there. That's what's the fun in that. But it all gets into that. It's just a little different, just a little fun. So I'll do that from time to time. It's with some of the trees that I develop, maybe just to see who's paying attention. I think right? It's kind of fun.
Interesting. So like a really a big appreciation for uniqueness, but subtle uniqueness, not in your
Yeah,
face uniqueness. Yeah, interesting.
yeah, yeah.
So the other thing, your designs take a long time to realize. So I imagine your aesthetic sometimes changes over time. And so like when you look at a design that's complete, I mean, air quotes, complete today, that's your aesthetic from 20 years ago, right? Or something like that, right? So how do you balance that changes in your personal taste or aesthetic and trying to complete, like bring the tree to the original conception? Or can that conception change over time?
I mean, it does changes. It does change over time. Some trees that I've worked on years ago, what I try to do it is that if that tree is started a certain way, I try to just continue and go with what I was thinking back then, what I would consider, because sometimes it's difficult to make big fundamental changes, right? And all I can really do is that on the newer trees that I work on, if my aesthetics has changed and I move into that direction, then at least that batch of or grouping of trees will start following that aesthetic. So I've not run into the case where I've had a tree, I had a certain idea of what it is or what I want it to be, and had to change it a bunch because my aesthetic changed. I can't even say that my aesthetics has changed that much, or at least it's changed in a way where I might modify a finished tree a little bit, but it's not fundamentally like big changes. So
It's like things that you can edit in the final, like the
yeah,
last kind of shaping before,
yeah,
like when it's getting into really close to show territory versus something fundamental to the build process.
yeah. Again, I do like to see projects kind of being followed through, right? If
Yeah.
I start something and that was the plan, I want to stick with the plan and just follow through with that plan to achieve what I originally wanted. I do find that some of the challenges that people had is that they keep changing their plans all the time. So now the front is now the back. Now the back is the front. 3 years later, the back is now the front again, and so forth. Or, I'm going to make the tree go to the right. So I got to grow this branch. It's after a while, it's just kind of like, how about we just finish this thing? Reserve this stuff for the newer stuff that you get. And let's see if you can at least follow through with this plan. Because from a learning perspective, that's so important to see a project through to the end. I have found that in my experience and with a lot of my clients or people who are really learning bonsai is seeing a tree from the beginning or partially somewhere in the early development stage to the finish, like I'm going to show this tree, is their their confidence and their understanding of bonsai or developing bonsai, it just jumps like tenfold because they've seen what it was like when it was not much to something. And so I find that a lot of people are a little bit too stuck in fixing trees, and that's something I generally blame the professionals for that. And I'm a professional, right?
Mm,
I usually blame professionals for that because I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a monetary thing or ego thing. Is that I have a sense that a professional would always want to be working, and they want to make sure they tell you something that so you're actively working, and they're going to have you do something so that so everybody keeps working, right? As opposed to saying, you know what, you've been working on this tree for 10 years. Maybe the opposite side is the better front, but you know what? Follow through with the project. Let's get to a finish, right? It's not worth it to make that change, no matter because people start falling into that mindset of, well, I'm going to fix this, and then they fix it. They spend another 5 years, 10 years fixing it, and then they do that. And then they're trying to fix something else. And then they're trying to fix something else. And this tree just never gets done. It's like 30 years now. And the tree is just like it was 5 years because it kept getting changed over and over. I know that was not the original question. I just kind of went off tangent.
no, no, that was really, really awesome information. I mean, and it's definitely really related. It makes a lot of sense, right? And if
Yeah.
you're kind of redesigning something, like taking a historic tree and redesigning it, like that initial redesign sets the tree on a different path, but then you're now signing up for like you need to be there the next 10 years to make it
Yeah.
realize the
Yeah.
ambition of the design, right? So
And
it's hard to balance that.
yeah, and I feel that I mean how my aesthetics is or what I'm trying to create in bonsai, I don't want to sound like or at least it may sound more boring, is that my aesthetics I don't think has changed that much
Interesting.
since I come back from Japan because there's an aesthetics that I like, and I've spent all the I mean, I came back from Japan 13 years ago now. I think it was 13. Yeah, 13 years ago now. And I've been just trying to do the best I can for the aesthetics that I like. And I find that in itself is already hard enough. Like my feeling is like I just don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? I want to take what I've learned, what's already been done, and just keep pushing it to be better and better. Now, I'm not saying we can't, deviate from that and do something very different. I'm not saying that, but at least for me, I'm finding that I'm getting a lot of enjoyment just recreating what I saw in Japan. I personally, I think we need a little bit more of that in the U.S. because we don't have anything like that already.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
until
there
the day
aren't,
that we have, yeah.
I was going to say, like at the PBE, for example, you don't see a lot of trees that look the same as you and your clients' trees, right? Like, and I would say that's indicative of the broader US bonsai ecosystem and the level that it's at, right? Um, so I think having that foundation of being able to make high level trees, I think is a good thing to strive for in general in the community, right? Which makes sense. And that doesn't
Yeah,
happen instantly. You have to work towards that.
yeah, or at least I just feel that some of the trees that I'm making with my clients is that in itself is something we don't see here. That let's just try to get a little bit more of that before we start moving on to something else, right? I would be perfectly happy, and maybe maybe I'm just getting older, but I'd be happy if we saw more trees just like that in a way. And this is only considering saying that okay, the trees that I'm showing is considered good, right, or considered something that people like or want to have. They would say, okay, well, then let's try to get more of that. And I don't see a lot of that, right? So I'd
Mm.
say, well, how about we focus on that first before we start getting so out there? And what is this all about? You ever seen the show like when I was growing up, I watched the show Iron Chef a lot.
Yes, yes, yeah.
You watched that, right?
Uh-huh. Yep.
And it's a competition, and the funny thing is they always end up having say one chef that's like traditional, right? It's Japanese. They
The
don't want to
French
change.
chained, or yeah, the French
Yeah,
chained. Yeah, yeah.
they want to just do whatever they do to like they're just honing that over and over. And then you got another chef that's a little bit, they start getting into what they call it, like fusion type stuff. It's a new thing, right? And new things are always exciting. People are always excited about that. And I find that the chefs that are doing the more modern fusion stuff would always tend to win, right? Because it's new, it's exciting. People just kind of gravitate towards that. And I often have a sense that I'm kind of like that other chef that's just trying to hone what they already know or what they feel is ideal and just trying to really work that and just kind of explore all avenues of that and just making it better and better. And I have to say that that's very much a Japanese thing. I think how they tend to, whatever they end up doing, they tend to try to take what they're doing and just try to make it better and better. They just find every little thing they can do to make that one thing that they're doing better.
Yeah, get 1% better every time, and then yeah.
And I think that's one of the things we appreciate about Japanese culture. They tend to do that, right? Whatever they end up doing a lot of times. I saw a video a long time ago where there's a Japanese pen maker and he just makes a pen and he's making these pens nonstop, but he's just trying to perfect it over and over for decades, right? And there's something fascinating about that to me. And but when you get into that, the nuances of that pen getting better or just the shape of the pen or the workmanship of that pen, it's very nuanced. It's not in your face, it's not showy at all, but it's there. And I think the Japanese are so good at doing that, and I think it's very much based on their culture or their experiences throughout the centuries with religion and whatnot that gets them to do it that way. So that's the part that I'm attracted to. So I feel that in bonsai, that's kind of what I do, which is why I say that my aesthetics didn't necessarily like change a lot. I would say I'm still trying to find that perfect
That
in a way.
perfection. Yeah,
That
exactly. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, very, very Japanese mindset. But I mean, I think that like that comes from, I mean, yeah, I don't want to act like I'm a expert in Japanese
no
culture
no
at
no
all.
no
But
no no. Go ahead, go ahead.
one thing that I think is interesting is like they have a really long history of excellence in craftsmanship and artisanship that we don't have the same concept necessarily in the US. And so you don't see fifth generation carpenters, or
Mhm.
usually, I mean, maybe that exists some places, but you don't see that same kind of passed down and that appreciation for that like craftsmanship level. I mean, even
Yeah.
you have like the separation between like white collar and blue collar jobs, for example, right? And so there's like just a different culture in the US that maybe doesn't prize that as much.
Yeah.
But I find it really refreshing to like have that focus on I'm just going to try to get really good at this one thing, right? And do it very
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
like undeniably well,
And yeah, and I'm not saying that's for everybody or that is the
Totally.
way and
Totally.
that's somehow superior to, the things we do here. I mean, there's good and bads about
Totally.
everything,
Totally.
right?
Totally.
But I think if anything, I would just say it, just again for understanding, try to experience that a little bit. And it's so hard to experience because it requires a ridiculous amount of patience, right? More patience than we're used to just to get a feel for that, right? Because we're kind of like, I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna try to get better at it as quickly as possible. How long is this gonna take? It can't take that long, right? That's kind of the mindset we had. Well, I'm a pretty,
Or if it
we're
takes
pretty smart.
long, you're not good at it. Yeah. Or like you don't
Yeah,
have
yeah,
any
and then we
talent
and then
for it.
we
Yeah.
we give up, right? Or whatever, right? Kind of thing. It's so difficult because it's not something that we easily can jump into because it's just such a slow process, and so I understand why it's hard, right, for people to get that feel. So I mean, all I can do is just at least try to explain to people that it is there, and it just takes time, and you just have to have the patience for it, and just give it a shot. Again, have that open mind, and being open-minded doesn't mean open-minded for 10 minutes, right? It's being open-minded for years, right? That's the ask that I'm putting out there, is that there could be something that we're missing out, that it's just a time thing. Can we really wait it out? It actually reminds me of I remember when I was finishing my apprentice or towards the end, I had a visiting apprentice that came to the nursery. And it was interesting because he was a professor and he's used to, Western culture, right? If I don't know something, I'm going to ask you, you're going to tell me, and then I know, right? And so he would just ask a lot of questions, so many questions that it's kind of like, if you just stop talking for a few minutes and just experience what you're doing, you'd probably answer it yourself, right? That kind of thing. And I asked him one time when he was asking questions, I said, if you ask me this question and I don't tell you, and I say, I'll tell you 1 year from now, what are you going to do? Right. And he was like, well, I'll ask somebody else. Right. Okay. That would be the typical mindset, right? It's this concept of they need that information now, and anything less than that is not correct, right? They need to know. They're stuck in that mindset. They can't learn it themselves. They can't experience it. Right or wrong, I thought that was very fascinating because that's very much how things are learned in Japan in a way. It's this kind of more long, I wouldn't say thoughtful process, but it does require you to kind of just slow down, contemplate about things. In a way, maybe you might have a better understanding. And for sure, you can totally have a backwards understanding of things, right? Because the answer could be very simple, and then you come up with some crazy answer for it, and then nobody corrects you. And then you think it's that way. It's not like it's perfect, for sure.
Yeah.
But I guaranteed if you figure something out for yourself, you will remember it forever. And if it's something somebody had to tell you, you might remember it for only 10 minutes. So there's definitely a positive to it.
Yeah.
Everything I learned in Japan that I found out was actually correct, I will never forget.
Mm. Yeah, because it's so
And the thing,
deep in your bones and your muscle memory that,
yeah,
yeah,
it's, I worked for that, right? I thought about it. And somebody reads a textbook to me and says, "Yeah, this is how it is," and then I forget it, right? Because it was too easy almost, right? To get that answer in a way. On our end, we have to study that over and over. So it is then ingrained. We now know it. But the first time, sometimes we just don't know, even if it's told straight to our face.
yeah, yeah.
We just don't
Yeah,
process it, right?
a podcast listener actually shared this other podcast with me about like the concept of shuhari, which
Mm,
I think kind of relates to what you're talking about, where there's like a thinking brain, there's like a muscle body memory brain, and there's like a soul brain. Like there's these different ways that we learn things, and like true mastery comes through yada yada.
mm.
I mean, there's
Oh,
all this
interesting.
stuff around it, but how you were describing that actually aligns really well with my understanding of what like the Japanese concept of shuhari is. But
Mm.
so, it seems to work if that's how, you visualize that as well. But no, I think you've done a really good job of explaining your mindset, and I think it's something that we all can learn from. So I really appreciate you
Cool.
you
Thank you.
taking the time. I really enjoyed all the podcast episodes you've done with Jeremiah and others. I've really
Oh, yeah,
enjoyed, and
thanks.
I felt like I come out of a better understanding of your process and how to do bonsai. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for talking with me, and yeah, I mean, keep up the good work.
Now, I know probably everybody listening to this podcast, has heard of you, but is there a way that folks can, like, how can they follow along with your work or see your work? And how do you recommend folks kind of connect or learn from you?
Um, I mean, I do have a website. My website is ptbonsai.com. I do have some like a photo gallery there. Then I sell some stuff. But the photo gallery shows some of the work that I've been doing. Probably the more up to date work that I do, I usually post on Facebook. On my Facebook, it's just Peter T Bonsai. I also then post on Instagram, which I think it's Peter T Bonsai. Yeah, I post things from time to time. If people want to reach out on my website, my email's there, so people can contact me if they'd like through that route. So those are kind of the outlets that I have. Every now and then I do demos, and I mean, if for those out there that are going to the expo, I'll be there, so we can talk in person if you'd like to, which is always fun.
Yeah,
But yeah,
Peter's
yeah,
always
that's
got a
kind of where
fun
I'm at.
group around him. Lots of good times. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
awesome. Well, I think I mean, clearly people are resonating with your approach and your thought processes because you've built such a successful, you know, group of people building awesome trees. So awesome to see that, and awesome to see like your dream of the quality of bonsai in the US raising. So really appreciate you taking the time to kind of share that journey and how you're making that happen with everybody. So thank you, Peter.
Yeah, yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Addison. Appreciate it too.